Okay, we're going to start Siman Shilchat Halacha Aleph. So just before I start reading it, I'll remind you that when we read Shilchat Daled, we said that there are two different types, two different ways that we have to think about dough being together for Hafrashas Challah. Okay, two different halachos. They have similarities, but they're not the same. And one is when we want to find that if we have a shir challah, because we don't have a big bowl of dough, we have two pieces, and we want to decide if we have a shir challah. Then there's a way that they can become a tziruf. The two pieces can become combined, and din can be considered one. And there are all kinds of rules in Shin Chavdal of what it takes to make them to be considered one. And we're going to have a repeat, actually, a brief repeat of that. We're about to read that now. And a lot of Shin Chavdal was about assuming you made it in a way that it could be mitzurah, which grains can go together. If it's wheat and barley and spelt, how can the different grains get together with each other? That was Shin Chavdal was mainly about. And then the other one is something called mukaf, which is to say, assuming you have a shir. You have a shir challah and you're chayiv in challah. The first thing was to be chayiv in challah. Now assuming you have a shir challah and you want to be mafresh, then they may have to be in some kind of proximity to each other in order for the hafrasha from one thing to work on for a different piece. You have a big bowl of dough, you want to make hafrasha, they need to be in some kind of a proximity in order to make hafrasha. That's called mukaf. That wasn't to make them chayiv in challah, that was in order to do the hafrasha. Okay? That in a mukaf is going to be a halacha beis of this simon. Okay? The halacha aleph is going to be connected to what we talked about last simon, which is to decide, do they have a shir challah? Or said it differently, if they are they now one big unit that it's easy to be mafresh from one or the other? So it was in Shin Chavdalad, we're going to have in this halacha here, and again in Shin Chavdalad it's going to come up. If you're in between, it's going to come to din of mukaf, which is its halacha beis of this simon. Mukaf is a different din.
There's 2 points. It's going to be mitzvah for shear and mitzvah for one another.
Same thing. Those go together. Those go together. That was in Shin Chavdalad.
What's the second thing?
If you're going to be mafresh on the left side, will work for the right side.
2 different batches.
If you have 2 pieces of dough over here, when you pull off a piece from here, it works for this piece, works for that piece. So the rules of Tziruf Sal told us which one could work for other ones, and also what makes them mitzurah to make it into a shear. I have a pound here and a pound here and a pound here. How do I make them all together to be a shear chal? Okay, so let's start reading it then. We'll read it in pieces. Okay, shtei isis she'ein b'shom achas kishir. You have 2 batters, and each one of them doesn't have a full shear. So then, in noiger zu bezu action vokim ma'at mizu bezu, if they touch each other to the extent not that just they're touching, but they're noishchos, they're touching so well that if you pull them apart, a piece of one would get stuck onto the other one. So they've really gotten close together. We spoke about in Shulchan Daled. Then mitzvah, they're the mitzurah. In Haim Yamin Aroy Mitzvah Kvi Marshal Barbas in Shulchan Daled. Assuming that they're 2 of the right types that could be mitzurah. Like certain ones can, certain ones can't. So for simplicity, for what we need is, let's say they're both batters of wheat flour. Okay, so this is wheat flour and this is wheat flour. They can be mitzurah with each other. So if they're noigos, they're touching each other to a point that they're noishchos, that they're so touched that if you pull one apart, it rips a piece from the other one off of it. Then they're mitzurah to become one share.
So they're touching like they're covered with flour, so it's
you think if there's in between them, that's not mature. Correct. That's not mature.
Or just the din how close it is.
No, it's how well attached to each other they are. They're so well attached that one will put together. Right. It has to do with, right. Touching is not enough. It has to be touching.
It's really touching. Yeah, in this case, it's really touching. It's poked.
I think it would be correct. Okay, we can argue. Okay, now, before I read the next words, cases of noishchos is not so common to us. Okay, to us, noishchos is not so common. How often is it that a person doesn't have a shir challah, but he has 2 batters and they touch each other so well that they have this din of noishchos? It's not such a common thing. But what we're about to read is much more common, which is what this din is about. If they're not nidvakim, okay, now they're not nidvakim, but most poskim hold they are touching each other. Okay, so you realize in the beginning he said if they're touching until they're nidvakim, and now he says they're not nidvakim. So somewhere that means is they're not touching at all. But the din is the Mishnah passing like that in nidvakim means they're not nidvakim, but they are touching. And the 2 of them are in the same basket. Then hasal mitzarfim. So then the sal could be mitzaref them. That means is they're touching. They're not noishchos, so they shouldn't be mitzuref. But since they're in the same basket together, then they are mitzuref. That then works not only does it work when it's dough, which is when you think of tziruf happening to be chayiv b'challah, it even works even after they've already been baked. That is to say, and this is why it's more common than than the regular din of noshchus. If I take two challahs that were made from a small batter, two challahs made from a different batter, and I put them all together in one basket, and they're all touching each other, then the din is they can be mitzvah to make a shir challah. Even though they were not together when they were dough, and none of them had a shir challah. This one had a half a shir challah, this one had a half a shir. I put them in the same basket, and they're touching each other without being noshchus. That's good enough, and they can be mitzvah for shir challah. They do. Well, so as I mentioned quickly there's a Taz who says they don't have to be touching. In this case, they don't have to be touching at all. But the Gra says and the Mishnah Pasuk says that they do have to be touching. All the Shulchan Aruch only means to say is if in any vacuum, but it means that they are still touching. It's not so clear in what the Shulchan Aruch means. It's a Shalom Nachronim. The thing is that they have to be touching, please.
So they can be mafresh when they're baked.
They already were baked. They already are. They weren't chayiv until a minute ago. Until now.
If you put them in the basket after they're baked, you can't be mafresh before they were baked.
That's true. They were right before they were baked. Right. So you're mafresh now, and the chayiv chav. But so that's for us a more realistic case when things that were not a shir become a shir, as we're going to talk about this time and next time, how it happens l'maisa. But that's a more l'maisa for us. We're not going to have so many cases of noshchos, of things that are touching as batters. They were in a shir, and then they touched it, they became a shir. But that there should be Tziruf Sal. That's what this is called. Tziruf Sal is more l'maisa. Today we're going to talk about some of the basic dinim of it, and next time some of the applications of it, some of a very bunch of interesting applications.
So
Go ahead.
Does it depend on your kavanah? Like if you,
next time.
Does the shir challah automatically happen?
Next time. We're going to talk about that next time. Okay.
It's renegade if you set up for a kiddush or something.
Next time.
And then you cover with the tablecloth.
Next time. I'm going to talk about that next time. Okay. I'm going to talk about that. There's all kinds of cases like this. We'll go for next time. Today we're going to talk about just some of the basic dinim. Okay. So now, what we first. Everything, right? Mañana.
Come back next time.
Mañana. It's okay. Okay. So the first thing we have to think about is what if we just read that it goes even if they're mitzuruf after they are baked already. Okay? To us, at first glance, it doesn't make any sense to us because everything about challah happens when it's dough. Like for example, let's say you have a case of a goy who makes a batter. Okay? He makes a batter of dough, and then the yid buys it from him. Then it's part of challah. Because everything depends on, as we'll see in the later simon, everything depends on when you mix the flour and water together. That's when you become chayiv, when you mix flour and water together. So if at that point you weren't chayiv, how can you become chayiv later? All the halachos of challah happen when you mix the flour and water together. Or at least if you have the dough and dough, so they're touching each other, they're still in that form of being dough. But what is this that we should say we should be able to have a tziruf later on? It didn't have a shir challah. What does it have to have a shir challah later? How will that help later on? That you should make a shir challah. So, our Gerus of the Gemara doesn't say this. The Rambam said, maybe the Rif had it as a Gerus in the Gemara. The Rambam says that we don't have to do like this. It says in the pasuk, when talking about challah, it says v'hoya ba'achochem milechem haaretz. Okay, it says you'll be chayiv ba'achochem milechem haaretz, which is odd because it talks about eating bread. Okay, now we learn many dinner from the fact that the Torah talks when Hafrashas mentions the word lechem. Okay, but among them we learn them is that there's a part of the mitzvah that stretches until the time when it becomes lechem. Not only is it Reishis Arisha Sechem, not only is it the batters that are chayiv and challah, but there's also parts of the din that connect even when it's lechem also. Not just when it's batter, even when it's lechem also. And among the things we learn from that is that it could be shaykh to become chayiv and challah through tziruf all the way till the time that it's lechem. Even when it's already baked, you could still make it chayiv and challah, which is unusual. We wouldn't have expected that. That's what we learn from there. Okay, there's all kinds of din that we learn from this word lechem. There's a true Rosh Hashanah who talks about how on earth did we learn that so many din from one poor word. Right? There's just one little word lechem. He has a true about to talk about how he has a long list. He just goes on and on with things that we learn that from the fact that the term called lechem. Okay, so we learn that this din that we can have Tziruf Sal even when it's not dough anymore, even when it's very lechem. Okay, let's read a little further. The Mechaber says, "V'imnasem al tavla she'en lo levazvez." If you put them onto a table, okay, table doesn't mean a table, a platform, something like this, a table. She'en lo levazvez. It doesn't have walls coming up from the sides of it, and it doesn't have edges or borders.
Tray.
A lip, a tray. Okay, a tray. Then the din is ain't mitzarfin. They're not mitzurf. Okay, why they're not mitzurf? Okay, now you have to put them into a basket that has walls. Why they're not mitzurf? So really, this is a shayla in the Gemara. The Gemara is misupik. The Gemara says when we said that the din is that you have Tziruf Sal, is that because everything's in the sal, everything's in the basket and encompassed by the walls, or does Tziruf Sal just mean they're together, like on a table? So the Gemara is misupik about that. The Gemara is not partial to shayla, and since it's it's the Gemara is not punished the Shaila. The din is Challah nowadays is only Rabbanan. Shul Chutzar is Rabbanan. Challah is Rabbanan. So we'll make all about that. So the Mechaber says that if you put 10 Challas on this table all touching each other, they would not be Chayiv in Challah. It's a subject in the Gemara. We would be Mekel because nowadays Challah is only Rabbanan. Okay, so we'll Mekel, and you would not be Chayiv in Challah. Ulachein. The Ramah says, Ulachein, Kishim start from Bakli, if you're trying to make Tziruf Sal, I'll tell you why in a second. Yizahar shlo yetze shum davar l'mayla midayfnei hakli. Nothing should go out from the walls. So you have a basket and you put the challahs into it. You don't want it to stick out. And he explains the hainu kol kikar echad or isa l'mayla midayfnei hakli. When we say that you shouldn't have tziruf, that you can't have it out of the walls, it needs to like this. If this is the basket, okay, and it's got a bunch of challahs in it, okay. Well, they're not touching. You're right. Because they're not touching. Okay. All of the challahs in this case, they should be touching. Okay, but you pretend they're touching. All these challahs are considered to be in the walls. Even though this one is sticking up a little bit out of the wall, Lamaisa, part of it is in the walls. That's good enough. But if you have one that's completely over the walls, one that's completely out, that's the one that's not mitzvah. So the normal case is like you have it on a table. None of them have walls. But the thing is, if you want to make tziruf from the sal, the Ramah says make sure that all of them are in the walls and none of them are, no individual challah is completely out of the walls. Okay? So this din that the Ramah is talking about.
Like a slurpee, like a cap.
Slurpee cap?
Yeah, so like it extends over, allows you to fill up over the walls of the cup.
Right.
The cup.
Right.
Slurpees are not higher than Challah.
Okay, so you filled your slurpee cup with dough. No, so the part, let's say one of them is over the wall of the cup.
Well, then the roof is part of the walls also. That's also, yeah, that's good, yes.
It's a cover.
Okay, that's part of the walls. Okay, so now.
It's come with a cookie sheet, like a cookie baking sheet or something.
Oh, you say it has a little lip of an inch.
A little edge.
You're right, and the challahs could always. Right, that's good. So as long as they're in any part or under, that's good enough. That's a good example. So you might have just an inch of it in, but way on top of it, as long as you don't have a challah part way on top of it. Okay, now this din of Tziruf Sal that a person does after it's baked is halachos actually, which is halachos that we do it, which is like this. The Shulchan says you're not supposed to make matzah bigger than a shir challah. The batter of matzah is not supposed to be a shir challah. It has nothing to do with halachos challah. It's because you can't manage that much dough at one time. You're supposed to always have the dough moving when you're making matzahs for Pesach. So therefore, the Shulchan says don't make a batter of dough that's more than a shir challah. You're not supposed to do that. It's easier to work with a smaller batter. That's what he says. He says, okay, but we have a problem. Because the problem is, so of course you're not going to be chayim challah, because you made less than a shir challah. You weren't doing it for the shir challah, somebody, but you had less than a shir challah. The problem is, what's going to happen on Yom Tov if you stack all your matzahs together? You may end up making a Tziruf Sal, sort of unintentionally, maybe, we're going to talk about that more next time, but you may end up, in other words, you may 80% of a shir challah. That means if somebody drops in a few matzahs, all of a sudden you can have a shir challah. So the Shulchan says what you should do is, when you're finished baking your matzahs, now there's no work, they can't become chametz anymore. Now, put them all together into a sal. Do Tziruf Sal now, and then do Hafrashas challah. Otherwise, you may end up being chayiv challah later on, sort of unknowingly you'll be chayiv challah. So what you do is, you bedafka put it into, in fact, that's what they do in matzah bakeries. They have like a basket, and they put all the matzahs in. I feel that I don't know if I have a picture, but I thought I did. I couldn't find it. In the matzah bakery, they have like this big square bucket. There's the guy takes the matzahs out, is checking them for kfuls and fuchas, but he's also stacking them all together, and when he's finished, he's mafresh challah. The point is, those matzahs, the way I saw them, are stacked the wrong way. They're stacked like this. Vertical, however you want to call it. So each matzah is sticking partly out of the basket, but that's okay. As long as no matzah is completely out of the basket, then you could do that. And in fact, that's how you do this. This is mafresh challah. Right.
This is a halacha of salmon mitzvah from any doughs, any separate people, anything. It doesn't matter.
Next time. In
other words, if I was putting out, if somebody made cookies, you're putting out a tray of cookies. It happens to be you took from 3 different people, and you can have it.
We'll talk about that next time. I'm sorry that you're going to have to wait for me.
Next Friday we're not.
Next Friday could be. No, we're not going to do it next Friday. But admit it. Right. Exactly. What do you want to say?
All the matzahs are coming up, they're putting them in their own boxes, so you're not going to have different batches.
How do you know? When you come home, you bought 3 boxes of matzahs, you're going to stack them all. If you put them all together, you can make a Tziruf Sal. Who knows what's going to happen? You sort of... what I'm saying is it's a little dangerous. The Shulchan says you're close to a shir challah, so he says what you should do the Tziruf Sal, and what they do. That's what they do. When it says on the box challah that genumen, that's because they have to pay attention to that. You know what I mean? It's not, except the other ones would just say, the laws of challah followed. You know those guys. I don't know about it yet. Say if the laws of challah were followed because they were not followed. Okay. Anyhow. Okay. So now, there's another shayla in the Gemara. Another shayla in the Gemara. Okay, this is a big machlokes. We're trying to understand this, but there's another shayla in the Gemara. One machlokes we said is about whether if the sal has no walls, okay, or if the things are out of the walls. There's another shayla in the Gemara about whether you can have tziruf in an oven. Okay, we talk about tziruf in a sal. The machlokes in the Gemara whether you can have tziruf in an oven. The Beis Yosef brings from the Rambam, who says there is no tziruf. We pass that there's no tziruf in an oven. Okay, it's a shayla. It's a machlokes. It's not shayla. It's a machlokes in the Gemara. Seemingly, the machlokes in the Gemara. And the Beis Yosef says the reason why the Rambam passes lahakol is because challah nowadays is rabbanon. Even in chutzarts it's even more rabbanon, so to speak. So therefore, we make and say tziruf of an oven does not work. The mechaber doesn't bring it. I'm about to explain why. I'm going to say why in a second. But the mechaber doesn't bring it. That's not, you don't have to wait for next time. I'm going to explain this time. But the mechaber doesn't bring it. I'm not sure why. I guess if he doesn't tell you, then you'll figure out that it won't work. Okay, so that's why passing. There's no tziruf in an oven. Only tziruf in a sal. Okay, so the obvious question is, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between a basket and an oven? Well, what should be the difference between one and the other? Okay, now, I'll tell you what I see in some later about. I was surprised to not see it in Rishonim explaining it. I see, I'm going to tell you some Achronim who speak about it, but I don't see in Rishonim explaining what should be the difference. So, Reb Chaim Kanievsky brings two Achronim.
Because the oven is a karka.
So, good, that's good, one of the answers, okay. Chaim Kanievsky brings some...
It's close. It's a human thing, something called a karka. It's not.
Okay, so he brings the two Achronim whose svarim I don't have. Okay, I'll tell you what they say. The first one is a sefer called Das Kedoshim. Okay, both of these svarim I don't have. And he says that the oven,
just like your house. I'm sorry.
He says,
it's not perceived as being connected.
Okay, he says this Das Kedoshim says that the reason why there's no tziruf is because the ovens were open on the top, and therefore they didn't enclose the things properly. Okay, so the first thing is
baskets.
That's my second question is I don't get it. The baskets are also open on the top. I don't understand what he was trying to say when he says they're open on the top. Yeah, you're right. So what?
Baskets aren't the right definition open.
No one says there's no detail that says it has to be closed on the top. It just says it has to be in the wall. It doesn't have to be. Everybody goes no. The Ramah. The Ramah says we have to make sure it doesn't stick above the walls. That's the Gemara talks about being over the wall. No one says anything about the covers on top of it. Okay, maybe there's something going on with covers and we all missed it, right? But no one says anything. And also, and Reb Chaim Kanievsky he says, well, if so, then you really could do tziruf in an oven as long as you have a covered oven. Like our oven is covered on top, but my oven is covered on top. So he's not so sure about this. Okay, the other is a sefer called Mikdash Ma'at, who says it's because it's attached to the ground. Okay, now if I see the sefer, maybe I could see more of a hesber as to what he had in mind, or why that should be important. A little bit we'll talk about that next time. Okay.
The question is our ovens is
right. What we're going to talk about next time is, well, which way does our ovens fit into these? If there's a din that ovens can't be mature. If we understand the reason, we would know whether our ovens are also. Okay, we'll talk a little more about later. What do you say? That's the next time. Okay, next time. We'll talk about that next time. Okay. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky has his own hesber, and he says like this. He says when a person puts food into an oven, he doesn't plan on it staying there for very long. He plans on it being there just for a short amount of time, meaning to bake it, as opposed to in a sal, the person plans on being in there longer in the sal. So he says, that's what he thinks is the hesber. So to which he says, so in Cain, if I put into a sal temporarily, let's say I'm just carrying across the street, I'm just putting it to the south temporarily, maybe that should be tziruf also. Okay, so he leaves it off as if that makes sense, but there's of course sort of a built-in question, which is, well, then there's nothing really special about a sal versus a tanner. I mean, tanner, you do leave it in there for shorter, but sal, I don't know,
the story.
So I thought a variation of what Chaim Kanievsky said, which is like this. In a tanner, it's not that you put it in there temporarily. It's inherent to an oven that you can only put in there temporarily. After 15 minutes, there's going to be no bread left. It's going to burn. You can't No. But as an oven, when you put something into an oven, it's built in that you're putting it in there temporarily. It can only last for 10 minutes, an hour. There's a certain amount of time after which you must remove it from the oven because or else you're not going to have any food left. That's sort of built in. It's by its nature a weak holder because you put it in there just to do some kind of a service in this thing, as opposed to the basket. There's nothing inherent to the basket that says it can't stay here.
Let's say you put it inside an oven which is off.
So then that's fine.
Your logic should be fine.
Yeah, I think many people think that. If you use if your oven is off, it's just a box. That's really what it is. Okay, so the Mechol Karka maybe not. Okay, we're going to talk about a bunch of these kind of pratim next time. We'll kind of, I really mean it. But, okay, so I thought that it made more sense to say is that it has to do with oven is inherently not supposed to be. Okay? And with that, what I'm about to say, you could say in there has brosa, but I think it fits smoothly with me, which is, according to many people, the Yerushalmi has a machlokes, and the Yerushalmi says like this: one man Yoma says you can only do tziruf in a sal and not in an oven, and the other man Yoma says you can only do tziruf in an oven and not in a sal. Okay, so let's say if the reason for oven is because it's mechuber l'karka, so what did the other man Yoma hold? One person said only in a sal because that's not mechuber, and oven is mitzurif, and the other one held only if it's mitzurif. What's the machlokes? So the way I understand it is like this: if sal has an advantage that it could stay there for a long time. It's not inherently doesn't have to be there. But oven has a different advantage, which is an oven, you need to put the thing into the oven. It's part of making food that you have to put into the oven. So the oven has a certain automatic chashivas of this is where the bread belongs because bread has to go into the oven. You got to put bread into the oven in order to make the bread. You don't have to put it into the basket. So one man Yama says, no, what's important is, could it be here permanently? Is this the right place where it could stay? And the other one says, no, it's only in the place where it has to be here. Okay, but both of them are looking at look at this container has to be a container that actually is meant to hold this thing, either because it permanently can hold it, or it's meant to hold it because it has to go into there. But then at least we could hear the headsprits of the machlok. Okay, let's go on a little further. Back to the Mechaber. Mechaber says, "V'yesh misha omer." Some people say, if you cover over the bread with a mappa, with a cloth, then choshev, it's the same thing as putting them into a kli and mitzaref them in a kli. Okay, so the Mechaber says, "Yesh misha omer." Because it's only Mishaim, it's not Gemara. That's why he calls it Yesh Mishamer. And the Shach wants to be supported, so the Shach brings that it's a Maril who says this, and the Maril says that if you want to make Tziruf Sal for your Pesach matzahs, again, Pesach matzahs is a time when people particularly need to do that. If you want to do a Tziruf Sal for your Pesach matzahs, take all of your matzahs, put them into a cloth, wrap the cloth up, and now you have a Tziruf Sal, and you could be Hafrashas.
You have to wrap it.
That's what the Maril says. So Pri Megadim says, why did the Maril say that? Why did the Maril say you should put them into a cloth and wrap them around? Why don't you just say put a cloth on top of it? So you see from there the Pri Megadim says that when you make tziruf in a cloth in this mappa, when you do with a cloth, you have to wrap it on all sides. You have to wrap it from underneath and over onto the top of it. Okay, as opposed to with a regular tziruf sal, actually only walls. But he says no. But if you want to do with a cloth, you have to take it under and wrap it over the top also to make a tziruf sal from all sides. So the Bir Halachos says, I don't know what to tell you. He says the Mechaber doesn't say it. The Mechaber says, if you just cover it, he says, I don't know. The Mechaber doesn't say it. He says, then what should be the reason? Why would it make sense that you should have to wrap it from the bottom to the top? There is a bottom. There's a whatever it's sitting on. It's sitting on something. So I thought that the way we explain with the oven might help us explain this, which is to say, just like by the oven, we're looking for a box that shows a certain permanence to it. We're looking for that either the sal because it could stay there for a long time, or the other one, an oven because it has to be in there. There's something we're looking for, some kind of a permanence. And the wrong thing, let's say the oven is not showing that permanence. So maybe a cloth, if you drape a cloth over something else, the cloth by its nature is secondary to the other thing. I have a table, and I drape the cloth over the table. So where do you think the matzahs are? The matzahs are on the table. And the table is covered with a cloth. So the cloth maybe is lacking in showing that this is really a container. If I wrap it all around, then it's in the cloth. So maybe when I want to use the cloth as try to build walls with it, it's obvious to everybody looking at it that the matzahs are on on a tray, and there's a cloth over the tray. So the cloth is not the container. We're looking for some kind of a chashiv say this is the container that holds it. So maybe we're missing that on that thing. Okay. So but the Bir Halachos is not very happy about this. Okay. The Pri Megadim brings it. The Shach does say it. The Shach doesn't say it. The Shach brings this Maril just to support the Mechaber, and the Maril happens to say that's what you did. Pri Megadim thinks that you're to do. So the Bir Halachos says, he says, listen, he says, if you have a case, you have a basket. Here's a picture. You have a basket where some of the things stick out over the top. Okay, some of the things stick out of the top. In that case, for sure, you could just drape it over the top. If you want to put it onto a table and cover it, we'll do what Prim Button says and wrap it on all sides. But if you have it in a basket and some of them are sticking all the way over the top, then in that case, it's okay. You for sure could use that. Okay, I don't know what the difference is. I don't understand what he's trying to say. Why he thinks one case is different than the other. I mean, either cloth could have to go all the way around, or the cloth could go on top. I'm not sure why he thinks they're different, but choosing the halacha.
Extension of the basket.
Now it's an extension.
If it's in a basket, it's like a cover for the basket, so it's just an extension of the basket, so you really doesn't fall already.
If it's just a flat table, then it's an independent thing. But if it, okay, maybe that's what he means. He doesn't say what it means. He just says this. He says, in that case, for sure you could be makel. I'm not really sure why. Okay, anyhow, so now we've gone through all the simpler, basic halachos. As I said, in Mitzvah Hashem, next time we have a bunch of practical applications, particularly that Achronim seem to talk about. All kinds of applications, Mitzvah Hashem next time.